you will listen, a song I will sing about my daddy who ran a log train way down in the Southland in old Alabama. We lived in a place that they call Chapman Town.
Yeah, you know you're going to miss this. Welcome to Backwoods Teacher. We'll be talking today about the New Deal and the transition from the Great Depression into the New Deal. Okay, the New Deal is a series of programs created by President Franklin Roosevelt, and these programs are often credited with lifting the United States out of the Great Depression. That is a somewhat controversial view. There are many people that argue whether they actually achieved that, but they are a great period in our history. They show a great deal of ingenuity and effort and dedication from the American people. All right, as promised, this is a list of what you need to know for the upcoming test, which will be at the end of this week, at the end of this unit. You'll be having a test on the Great Depression, the New Deal, and then World War II. You have seen all of these things here on the far left already, and the material over here in the middle is what you will need for the New Deal, and the World War II information will be coming to you the next day. So there you go. Here it is. Access it from home. Do try to study, boys and girls. Do try to study. Let's take a moment here and see what you remember from Friday. Let's call on some different people to answer these questions out loud. We'll take some time to do that. Okay, Herbert Hoover was the final Republican president of the 1920s. He was the guy who had the misfortune to be holding the bag, holding the hot potato, the last one to sit down in musical chairs. He's the one that takes the blame. Hoover, I think, as a historian, gets kind of an unfair judgment because he did try to do some things to help. So one of the things we'll take a look at today is what Hoover did attempt to do, how some of it worked, why some of it didn't work, and why he got the rap that he did. All right, Hoover is with many Republicans of their time and some of the ones from today that aren't complete tools, and some of the ones that actually believe in something. Hoover had a very distinctive philosophy about the role of government, and he believed in things like rugged individualism, which is simply a belief that all individuals, or nearly all individuals, can succeed on their own, and that government help for people should be minimal. This may sound like a horrible idea to you young teenagers who are used to having your teachers find you the page in the book and hand you a pencil when you forget one, and basically give you everything because you can't bring a pencil to class. But back in the day when people built log cabins and settled great places like the state of Illinois, there was no government to help them. And actually, to give you a good case in point of what rugged individualism would be, it would be when this group of students went out and helped to the community to put sandbags down because the government, which was supposed to do it, did not. That's rugged individualism. Maybe some of you know that story. All right, so Hoover is a firm believer in rugged individualism. He believes that people should take care of themselves. And this, you need to understand how this is going to shape the kind of decisions that he makes. He also believed that the government helping people would rob them of their moral fiber. And what he meant by that, and what's meant by moral fiber, is your character, your strength of character, your resolve, how much you can do things on your own. The idea of federal welfare begins at this time. It did exist, but not to the extent that it does today. Hoover also had some famous last words as president. If you look there in the middle, when he was elected, he said, "I have no fears for the future of the country. We have banished the poorhouse. Our future is bright with hope." 7 months later, the stock market would crash twice, wiping out the majority of savings for many, many people and leaving many Americans homeless and unemployed. All right, we're going to take a look at the steps that Hoover took, President Hoover, and the steps that President Roosevelt took. These are the things you need to know. You should use your book to do this. It would help. If you are having trouble with the book, then of course use your magic telephone and access the internet. But Hoover takes several steps. One is the Hoover Dam. One is the founding of that acronym there. Acronym means a bunch of letters strung together. And then the bonus army. What is the bonus army, and how did Hoover deal with it, and what does that tell you? So these are things that he did while he was president in regards to the Depression. What do they tell you about him? That's what you need to write down when you're asking Cha-Cha for help. Okay, here we have Franklin Roosevelt's steps. He goes about things in a much different way. These two men were quite different. Roosevelt began something that he calls the New Deal. He is the cousin of Theodore Roosevelt, who had the Square Deal. So Franklin Roosevelt comes along and makes the New Deal. Later on, one of Roosevelt's disciples, a guy named Harry Truman, will have the Fair Deal, and then later Bill Clinton will have the Happy Meal. So Roosevelt has the New Deal. He establishes the idea of the 100 days. What is meant by that in regards to Roosevelt? What was the Brain Trust? What were fireside chats and bank holidays? And how did these things help? And now, to wrap things up, we asked one of the guys who revs his engine in the high school parking lot to summarize the things that you need to know. Thank you, mullet guy, for coming in. Now I can have some peace and quiet, and there's no engines revving. Okay, with the New Deal, as you learned last class period, the programs that were created fall into three categories. They all start with R: relief, recovery, and reform. Relief was money for immediate relief from starving, loss of property, etc. It was a short-term solution, immediate short-term solution. Recovery programs were programs that, for the most part, were programs that created jobs. And they were low-paying jobs, but they were jobs. And the idea was that these jobs would allow people to have money that they could put back into the economy. And finally, some of the New Deal programs were actually laws or acts. In fact, all of them were, but some of them were long-term, like the FDIC, which is still around today. It was an attempt at reform to make sure that bad things don't happen again to the economy and to the American people. Many of these others, like the Civilian Conservation Corps, provided jobs. The TVA provided jobs, but it also provided utilities. And the WPA as well provided jobs. All right, let's do a quick spin through a comparison of Hoover and FDR. FDR is probably one of the most loved presidents for obvious reasons. He was a very charismatic man and very well liked and interacted well with the public. He made himself very available to the public. Hoover, on the other hand, was not quite the same. He's from Iowa. He was a self-made businessman, and he earned all of his money, was not born into money. He believed that people should take care of themselves, and this is going to make him seem somewhat insensitive at the time to the suffering of the American people during the Depression. But Hoover, as I said, he earns his place in the world, and when he's president, he continues to have state dinners at the White House with all the fine china and the waiters with the white gloves and everything. Not because he's insensitive, but because he thinks it's important to keep that element of success going, and that's kind of a 20s mentality. So he does take steps to help to give government aid. He just does not do enough. It's too little and too late. So although Hoover is portrayed as a rich, uncaring Republican jerk, he has a really good track record as a humanitarian. He served in different government capacities where he actually helped people. And when it came to moral fiber, he had it. His biggest faults are probably that he was too self-reliant and too stuck in his ways. Roosevelt, on the other hand, is from New York. He's born into a wealthy family. He married his first cousin. He had polio and could not stand on his own. He smoked cigarettes. Roosevelt was an optimist, and he trusted other people to help him. I would characterize him as being the right leader for the right time, as can be seen by his fireside chats. His manner, his warm, likable manner, was what the country needed to steady things at that time. One of the things that I like about Roosevelt was that he kept trying ideas and was not afraid to fail. As far as moral fiber goes, not really. He was a bit of a squirrel with the ladies, but he was still a good president. All right, one or two final things here. As we transition from the Great Depression to the New Deal, there's also some cultural changes, and I'm throwing this out there for people that read and people that think and people that will go on to read and think at some point in their life. The 20s are marked by books and music and basically an adoration of money. And if you look at two of the books by F. Scott Fitzgerald, that's what they are about. They're about like a high-living Kardashian kind of lifestyle, except imagine like Kardashians that could read. And that's what these books are about. One thing that's interesting, though, is by the time F. Scott Fitzgerald writes his final book, Tender as the Night, which is about his wife's descent into madness and his subsequent descent into financial ruin, that book was very difficult to sell because it was the Great Depression and nobody wanted to buy a book about rich people. So when the Depression rolls around, we now see books like this, The Grapes of Wrath, and culture is marked by more of a rural kind of a struggle of people kind of culture. All right, some final thoughts on the New Deal. There were several New Deals. The plans often didn't work, and Roosevelt kept trying, and that's why he was able to push things through. The New Deal did cost Americans a bunch of money. That money had to come from somewhere, and it ties in indirectly with some of the predicaments we are in today. Some historians will say that World War II may have been the real reason for the end of the Depression, and I don't know that it will ever be proven, but there's some truth to that. Roosevelt served 4 terms, hence the 22nd Amendment. More Americans are dependent upon the government now than ever, so Hoover's thinking, which was ridiculed by the Democrats and is still ridiculed by them, has created a concept that we should allow more dependence on the government. After Roosevelt is elected, this is the first time where African Americans who had originally been Republicans because of Abraham Lincoln now tend to vote for the Democratic Party. So there's a shift here. The New Deal preserves a great deal of American arts and culture through the WPA programs, both rural, like Appalachian music, kind of obscure types of art that had not been around or not been noticed, are now preserved, and things like the stories of liberated slaves were preserved through some of the New Deal historians. The Supreme Court shot down several New Deal programs.